Hi there, and welcome to another exciting edition of Israel Explained, Shellacking Hezbollah edition. So, what happened yesterday? As we know, 3 weeks ago, Israel assassinated Fuad Shukr, who was the number two in the Hamas organization. And that, of course, with Middle Eastern rules being what they are, required a response, a revenge response from Hezbollah. Since that occurred at the same time that Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, it was expected that that response would be coordinated with Iran. But Iran has so far chickened out, and Hezbollah decided to launch their attack on their own. A few days ago, Israeli intelligence learned about that and started watching very closely for signs that Hezbollah was about to launch this attack. Last night, the attack was scheduled for 6 a.m. or so. So 4:30 a.m., Israel began a massive strike. Over 100 aircraft, I've heard from other sources, 200 aircraft, struck about 250 targets in Lebanon. Now, the focus of the attack was actually quite limited, even though it was massive. There's a lot of targets. It was only on the areas where rockets were being prepared to launch at Israel at that moment. Nothing further north, nothing inside cities or towns, no assassinations of commanders, which is important. The idea was a preemptive strike to stop Hezbollah from hitting Israel, but not intended to escalate into full regional conflict. That's because Israel doesn't particularly want that kind of wider regional conflict, and also because the United States asked Israel, warned Israel not to pursue that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the attack was a very big success. According to Israeli intelligence sources, the Hezbollah plan was to launch 6,000 rockets at Israel over a few hours. All they managed to shoot was somewhere between 250 and 350, depending on who you believe. Israel shot down the vast majority of those rockets, drones, etc. Um, and of course, most of them weren't launched at all because Israel destroyed the squads and the launchers on the ground. So this was a great triumph for two elements of the Israeli military, the intelligence and the Air Force. Let's start with the intelligence. Intelligence had to gather two kinds of intel. First, they had to gather um, when the attack would occur, which they did successfully. Then they had to gather where the proper targets would be. Now, this operation was planned for October 11th, when Israel had a complete operation to attack Hezbollah prepared. This was one element of it. There were other elements as well involving attacking further into Lebanon, decapitation strikes, etc., that were not launched. So this plan had already been in the making for months, and Israel had been adjusting it over the months. Those two elements had to come into play. The Air Force also faced a serious challenge in doing this. They had to do two things. They had to be able to reach over the target undetected, which is relatively easy because Hezbollah doesn't have the best technology, but also, and this is more difficult, to launch bombs simultaneously. Because as soon as one bomb hits, the rest of Hezbollah hears about it, whether they see it directly or talk about it in their communications, and then everyone scatters. So you had to hit all at once. That seems to have gone very well. Um, Hezbollah did launch a bunch of rockets in return. Like I said, most of them didn't hit their targets. The ones that did mostly hit open spaces, a couple hit houses, but there were only very light injuries to people from fragments. The one tragic fatality came when an Israeli interceptor hit a Dvorah class fast patrol boat and killed one Israeli naval soldier. So that was tragic, but no one was killed directly by Hezbollah. Despite the fact that this was a real failure from Hezbollah's perspective, uh, Nasrallah went on TV and talked about what a great success this was. He talked about how the A200 intelligence HQ and Piglilot, the energy depot in Tel Aviv, the Kiryat in general in Tel Aviv, the major military base there, were the targets, and he said that they had been hit. Um, Ehud Yari, who's an Israeli, very esteemed expert on Arab matters, says that in all the decades that he's been covering Nasrallah and Hezbollah, he's never seen Hezbollah lie this bold-faced. Nasrallah actually enjoys a little bit of a reputation in the Arab world, and even in Israel at one point, of being honest. I know that sounds funny, but it's true. And this was the most dishonest thing he ever said. So going very much against that and showing that Hezbollah really have an interest now in pretending that they achieved something because they don't want to admit the fact that they were humiliated and defeated because that would be very bad for their standing in Lebanon and in the region. But they also can't escalate because if they continue to escalate, it looks like Israel will continue to shellac them. And the price will be very high and the humiliation will be even greater. So they released videos showing them hitting various targets, either forged or animated, really trying to save face after this spectacular failure. So Israel and the United States talked about this not escalating, and that's why the attack was limited to below the Litani and without taking out any leaders. And the United States is very happy with that. They appreciate attacks against Hezbollah, which they see, of course, correctly as an Iranian proxy and with the fact that it was done with care in order to not escalate. They're also happy that Israel sent messages to Hezbollah indirectly that they plan to de-escalate after this. Hezbollah has sent similar messages. So Nasrallah did say that his organization holds in reserve the right to continue to respond, but it doesn't really look like that is going to happen anytime soon. But it's important not to overstate the success of this operation. Yes, it was very successful in what it was, which was preventing a specific attack on Israel. But the harm to Hezbollah is only tactical. They have still somewhere between 120 and 150,000 rockets in total. They still have massive ability to launch. Their losses in rockets and squads, etc. They lost launchers. Each launcher can contain up to 64 missiles, but there's no way that this even began to scratch the surface of their massive reserves. Now, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that he's determined to remove the threat to Israeli citizens everywhere, but the people in the north really feel like this operation was insufficient. First of all, they resent the fact that this attack only came when there was a direct threat to Gush Dan, to the center of Israel, to Tel Aviv and its environs, and they feel like Israel has allowed them to be bombed for months without a proper response. Some in the north are calling this Operation Peace for Tel Aviv, sarcastically and bitterly, and feel like they're being treated as second-class citizens and not being defended. And this operation really did nothing to lift the immediate threat to them. Hezbollah is not going to be able to launch any massive attack on Israel right now because Israel's watching it very closely, but they will be able to continue to drip rockets, UAVs, etc., at northern Israel, making life there unlivable. And the citizens there haven't been able to return to their homes, despite the fact that the war has been going on for more than 10 months. So let's not exaggerate the success, although it certainly was one. Now, how does this link to the other big question? The ceasefire agreement, potential ceasefire agreement with Hamas. Is there even a link? The answer to that is pretty clearly yes. Um, Sinwar has gone back and forth over wanting this deal, at least according to reports. A few months ago, he felt like he was winning the PR war, and so he didn't want a deal at all. Then, a couple months ago, he felt that the world had forgotten about Gaza, that Israel was making a lot of gains on the battlefield, and he moved more towards deal. Over the last few weeks, he's been waiting to see if Iran and Hezbollah, Houthis, etc., will get Israel involved in a massive regional war. It's become very apparent over the last few days, and especially last night, that that's not going to happen. That Iran has no interest in starting a regional war with Israel. It feels that right now Israel is being very aggressive. It's being backed by the United States. Israel holds escalation dominance, and it's standing down. Hezbollah feels the same. Sinwar is no idiot. He can see that the chances for that have gone down. So that increases the impetus on him to make a deal. And there are signs that Hamas might be willing to take a deal where Israel remains on the Philadelphia corridor partially, at least temporarily or something, if Hamas can have the Rafah crossing. So we're starting to see a little bit more optimism from the Israeli team, from the Egyptian team on this happening. Paradoxically, this attack might actually make a ceasefire more likely. They have said no to the most recent offer Hamas has, but it's starting to look like that isn't exactly a their final say, and they may be willing to reach a compromise. This is all very preliminary, but that's the feeling that people have, that this brings a little bit more optimism to the table. So we'll be following all this closely. But the upshot of this is that even though the status quo hasn't changed in the north, the chances of a regional conflagration have gone down greatly. And perhaps most importantly, Israel has restored a lot of its deterrence. One of the reasons Israel should probably take a ceasefire now is because you can no longer say that Israel doesn't have achievements. It's restored its deterrence to a great degree with what it's done to Gaza, with what it just did to Hezbollah, with what it's done to Iran. Um, so that has been a major achievement. Then getting back the hostages would be another achievement, especially if Israel can maintain troops on the Philadelphia corridor. So altogether, today was a good day for Israel and a good day for the chances of a ceasefire. I have two questions. No, I have three questions. One is from Aurelia. How can you negotiate with a serial killer, which is essentially what Sinwar is, motivated by nothing more than needing to hold his position as head of Hamas in Gaza? Is Netanyahu not much in the same set of circumstances? Who is or will be the honest broker here? Do you feel there's any hope for the hostages? Okay, so those are a lot of different questions with different answers. The reason Israel's negotiating with Sinwar is because it has no choice. As long as Sinwar holds the hostages, there's no one else you can talk to about the hostages. And Israel has either been unable or unwilling, depending on who you ask, to remove Hamas and talk to someone else. So it's basically like if a maniac is holding your family hostage. So you said a serial killer. So yeah, a serial killer is holding your family hostage. He calls you. He says you have to do A or B, or I'm going to kill your family. You kind of have to negotiate with him, or your family is going to die. So that's kind of the situation. You're right. He's a psychopath, but you have to talk to him. Who's the honest broker? There's no such thing as an honest broker. Netanyahu has some clear political motives, personal motives. Sinwar has nothing but sinister motives, no matter how you look at it. Egypt and Qatar are playing games to help Hamas, clearly. And the United States is considered by most Arab countries to be Israel's lawyer and not particularly trustworthy. Of course, that depends who you ask, too. So you're just working with very flawed actors, but that's reality. You have to deal with reality, and you have to deal with the actors who exist in reality. Do I feel there's hope for the hostages? Yes. There definitely could be a deal because there are interests on both sides leading towards that. But as we've seen, there are also some very serious difficulties. Vanna Loven asks, what conditions would have to be met for Sinwar to accept a ceasefire? Iran honestly looks cowed to me and is looking for a way to back down. Yeah, so that's basically what I addressed. I think the conditions are almost there. The truth is Hamas has caved from what from reports on several things, like the veto Israel has on the prisoners, the exile on prisoners, those sorts of things. How many hostages will be alive in the first stage? They're not willing to cave on Philadelphia corridor yet, but they may be willing to if they can get the Rafah crossing. So, yeah, Sinwar is looking more likely to take a deal, but again, the meeting point between him and Israel, we're still not there. Jose asks, why is Egypt so strongly against Israel controlling the Philadelphia corridor? Wouldn't it be better for them if it's under Israel's control? I mean, I would have thought it's against their interest for Hamas to rearm again. Yeah, so that's $1 million question. Why is Egypt against Israel controlling Philadelphia? Depends what answer you buy. There's different answers people are offering. One is that it's a violation of the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement, and that it would be very bad for their public image inside the country, for public opinion. The public opinion part is true. The peace agreement part is not true. Israel was on Philadelphia for years, and it wasn't considered a violation of the peace treaty. But now it would be seen as a concession to Israel by the Egyptian public at a time when Israel is considered by Egyptians, rightly or wrongly in my opinion, to be committing genocide. There's other theories. One is that Egypt has much closer relations with Hamas than thought before. Perhaps they're getting money from Qatar or Iran or someone to help Hamas. The other is that perhaps there's corruption in the Egyptian government so deep that uh, kickbacks are being received for smuggling arms and drugs and whatnot, and they don't want that amount of money to stop, and they also don't want the world to see that possibly they've cooperated with all sorts of things that they haven't been cooperating with. So there's a lot of reasons. I think it's a combination of all three. I don't trust Egypt at all, at all, especially when recent scandals have come out about Egypt trying to bribe Donald Trump, bribing Menendez successfully. I don't trust Egypt. I think they're a bad actor. I think we're always starting to understand how bad an actor they are now. Okay, so that's the end of this episode. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media. Any contribution is appreciated. And I'm back to working on my history podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast, where I'm working on an episode. I'll be done by the end of the month on the split into the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel and how that happened, what the story is in the Bible, and what the historical reality was. So I'll see you here next time something interesting happens.